Hello again. This is Stewart Gandolf here for another podcast. I'm excited to have yet another really smart, informed guest with me today, who happens to be a client and a friend. We don't do enough clients on this podcast. So I was talking to Ben, I don't know, what was it, Ben, a month ago, and we were saying, like, why don't you come on the podcast? And he's like, yeah, sure, why not? So welcome, Ben. Good to see you, Ben.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Great to see you as well.
Well,
It's too late to say Happy New Year, but we'll still wish you one nonetheless.
You too. And so Ben, besides being a friend and a client, is Associate Vice President for Sales for CureMD's Oncology division, Oncentric. And so super excited to talk to Ben. As I mentioned a moment ago, he's very knowledgeable, had great instincts as a client. We'll talk about this a little bit later, knew exactly what he wanted. Just the kind of thing that makes it fun for us as an agency. It's very fulfilling to work with someone like Ben. And of course, on top of all these accolades, Ben is wearing the secret tech black look bro shirt along with me today, as it turns out. Welcome, Ben, again.
It's a real pleasure, and thank you for the accolades. Much humbled and appreciated. I did actually have three layers of black, so I took the memo well. And I'm just excited to have the conversation, because I think when a company decides to kind of embark on this quest and think, how do I either reimagine myself or create an image for myself for a new company, it's just really important that they think a lot about how they want that to take place and the partner with whom they want to do it. The experience that we had with you and your team really, taught me a lot, even though I've done this a couple of times before in my career. But at the end of the day, the education that I came away with was the right agency working with you in an accountable manner is essential to a successful process. And actually, as you can see behind me, if I remember to lean the right way,
Yes,
this
absolutely.
is one of the backgrounds that Brett created for us. And I'm just, thrilled to have the opportunity to talk about our experience and encourage others to undertake, a similar endeavor.
Awesome. Great. Okay. So I was just checking my microphone there, but it sounds like I'm still working.
No, you
So,
sound great.
all right. So great. So, for our listeners, we got to know Ben and his team back in early 2023. And it seems like, wow, it can't be that long ago, but it was.
It was.
And so they told us they were considering a brand. Actually, it's funny. When your teammate reached out to us, Ben, I go, "Oh, CureMD. I know CureMD. How fun! I don't know what this is about, but CureMD is one of the practice management platform slash EHR EMR space is insanely competitive for those of you who don't know it. But CureMD is a large brand in that category. And so very, very look-alike audiences, competitors all look and sound the same. And so to credit to Ben and his team, they were looking for a partner and they knew they wanted to create a brand. Ben, tell our listeners a little bit more about that and, kind of what you're hoping to do.
Well, it's interesting. When we thought about this engagement and honestly dedicating the budget and resources to it, we understood that as CureMD, like you said, broadly recognized, but the whole EMR practice management space is somewhat generic right now. There are a lot of players. We offer a lot of the same content and services. Um, we think that we do it well, and we have a full stack of services and offerings that differentiate us in many ways. But as with any company, you kind of fall into the white noise of the space. Even more importantly, we service 35 specialties, only one of which is the one I focus on, which is oncology. And we did a brand audit in cooperation with one of our partners that found that out of oncologists in the community setting, which is our target market, only 6% of community-based oncologists knew CureMD had an oncology specific offering. So it was a wake up call for us. We really felt like we had some measure of awareness in the market. And when we had that metric, we used it as a platform to not only convince management to provide the funding for a rebrand, but to allow us to be engaged in it, not just as, people having to do other jobs, but as an organization, all contributing to how we can lift this project forward and make it a successful one. It was just necessary. Nobody knew we were out there, and our primary competitors were winning business. And when we follow up with someone afterwards, they would say, I would have called you, but I didn't even know you were there. So when you think
Cool.
about brand investment and you're in a situation like we were in, there's an opportunity cost there. So you can say, yeah, the project cost is X, but the opportunity cost of being left out of so many of these opportunities, not even considered, sent an RFP or called, is so much larger than that initial investment in the brand and the resulting, success that can come from that.
There's so much to unpack there, Ben.
I talk a lot.
No, but what's great is, first of all, number one, and I think most of the people that, or at least many of the people listening today that are struggling with branding and what to do about it, there's some big lessons right there. Lesson number one is data. You use data to come back with something that's objective that was to give you a sense of where you guys stood in the marketplace. So if only 6% of people know you, that's a problem. That's not just saying, you coming to, other levels of management saying, nobody knows us. When you have data, it catches attention, right? Otherwise, it just sounds like a whiny salesperson. So that's the thing. Number two, you guys were able to demonstrate that you were losing business because of that, and that people don't even know you. And that, by the way, when you said that, I thought, oh, because
Yeah.
man, I can relate. Like you guys are specialized in what you do. We are at what we do, and it's like it's amazing to me that people that are in healthcare, when they're looking for an agency, they just hire like the guy next door. It's just crazy to me. Like, wait, you could have had incredibly specialized expertise for the same amount, but they never even occurred to them to look around. So I feel your pain there, Ben, for sure, because we see that. But I think that's the importance of branding for us, for you guys, for everything. You have to just keep pounding that drum forever. And the challenge, though, is that, well, I'll come into challenges in a little bit here. Let's talk about the competitive situation just a little bit more, like,
Hmm.
because it is, a sea of sameness, and trying to differentiate yourself. Give me a sense of what that's like as a sales, VP or AVP, and, your team working with you. Like, what's that landscape like?
Well, it's so difficult to articulate the, I'm going to use a fun word, the cacophony that uh, a lot of these decision makers experience on a daily basis. In my specialty, oncology, it's particularly acute because they're being besieged on all sides by different vendors, different people who want to sell to them, service them, then their own providers who are demanding more and more of them to help their businesses run. And then just the stresses of day to day of running a medical business, whether it's a solo doc practice or a 100 provider practice. So in order to kind of like insert your messaging into that crazy milieu of information, um, we didn't have a chance because we didn't have anything to truly differentiate us. We weren't able to articulate like to like value because when you're starting, from so far behind in terms of mind share and awareness, you can't pay per click to get somebody to follow on to an action item if they don't know who you are or you don't have credibility as to what you can deliver. So that's why we really undertook the branding activity, is that we knew we needed to reinvent ourselves in order to use this as a splash moment and come out and have that momentum kind of build towards that broader awareness where we wouldn't miss out on those opportunities and people would loop us in. And we've since seen success with that, but it was that an original understanding that we were just so far behind the curve relative to what the other players in the market we were trying to compete against were doing, and that share of the awareness of who was doing what in the market. We knew we had to start from scratch, and engaging with a branding agency like yours that specialized in healthcare and took the time to understand our business and the world in which we live, even as part of the early elements of the engagement, really impressed us and knew we had picked the right partner.
That's awesome. So, it's funny. I just want to respond back to something you said a moment ago, too. I recently did a podcast with an oncologist, just a fascinating guy. Really, I don't know if you know him. His name's Doug Flora, but he's with a health system, and he talked about a lot of things. And one of the things he talked about was very consistent with what you just mentioned. Although sometimes you guys are working with the administrator as well as doctors, depending on the situation. But he's like, I understand that people get frustrated with us doctors, being kind of ADD and all over the place. But, one minute I'm talking to somebody that, I just 5 minutes ago, I just told them they were going to die. And then 5 minutes later, I'm looking at their MRI, worried about our patient. Then I've got all the office stuff. It's just really hard for us to focus. And so we always have, I'm paraphrasing, I didn't say exactly those words, but do get the idea. And so if you multiply that times lots of oncologists, and of course, in smaller groups, the doctors are still running the show, and the sort of 10 doctor groups, there's kind of democracy, which is even harder. And then you get to larger corporate groups. These are all different kinds of things. And so the messaging has to work for all those different kinds of audiences too, which is something is separate because, in some cases the administrators are in charge, in other cases the doctors are. Well, I want to pivot because everybody wants to know about challenges, and it wasn't all easy for you guys, even as bright, smart, forward-thinking as you guys are. It wasn't always easy. So tell us about some of the challenges that I think our audience will really relate to this that you may have gone through.
Well, I think when you're considering a project like this, before you even engage an external partner, you should try to find, an internal consensus on, what the success metrics are for the projects. You have to establish some initial baseline KPIs. So you can say once the brand is launched and we're measuring, greater engagement, regardless of how you do that via the website or leads or whatnot, that you can have a clear before and after picture. Because otherwise you can say that felt successful, but how really was it? And I think it's important to kind of understand where you come from to where you want to go. That's important both internally and with how you engage with the partner, because I think one of the things that we worked with your team on, and I think worked really well with Paul on, was holding us accountable to what we felt like was a project, like the objectives of the project overall, and helping your team understand where we felt like we needed to go. Key events along the way, like one of the things we really focused on was getting towards our launch at the Community Oncology Alliance meeting, because that was our big coming out party. It was supposed to be the Super Bowl for the brand. But he asked us, right then and there, what does that mean? What does that look like? How does that translate into engagement post that event? And so that kind of back and forth conversation really helped us kind of craft the project, and then come to kind of an agreement together as to how we're going to execute it. So I think it's important that that internal process be part of how a company thinks about a project like this, and carries that attention to it, because it's not something you just conceptualize and launch with the partner. You have to stay engaged. You have to have a call and response with, like we did with your folks, on messaging, on, I mean, everything from colors to shapes, and ultimately what we wanted our website to look like. You can't just ask your team to do that on their own. They have to have full engagement from us. And there's times where competing priorities happen and you don't always get back to each other with deadlines and whatnot. And I think that slowed our project down because we weren't necessarily as always accountable to deadlines as we could have been. But I think at the end of the day, had we known that at the time, we would have directed the attention, because what we ended up doing was delaying a really beautiful launch by about 60 days because we weren't as attentive to the deadlines that we committed to as we could have been. But that's a lesson learned, and one that I encourage others to carry into their own projects.
That's great. It definitely is. And I'm going to add to the challenges part because there's a lot when it comes to this topic. And I think deadlines, by the way, thank you for owning that, because that is really important. And I get it because we're all busy, and it's like the from the agency standpoint, we want as much time as we can to work on this and to to think and ruminate and to kind of play with ideas. It all worked out great because as we know, the deadline for COA, the Community Oncology Alliance show, wasn't going to move for us.
It was not.
So, so it just means we have to work faster, harder toward the end of accelerate at that end of it, and it all turned out awesome, which we'll come back to in a moment. But I think that's a lesson. I would just add a couple there because this is, we do, you know, Ben, it's really interesting because in the marketplace, um, we're definitely branded as healthcare. We're definitely branded for our expertise. I'm talking about as an agency. The interesting thing is, for many years, we really leaned into the digital side more, and we've always been integrated. But now, like that integrated model where we're doing a lot more branding is more common too. And that's again brand evolution for us. Like we did a rebrand a few years ago, but as we've grown, we're very different than we were 20 years ago, right? So it evolves over time, and organizations naturally have to. I would say another couple of things that, and you can speak to any of this if you want, Ben, but like things we see all the time as challenges when it comes to this topic on the client side. One is, not really, and I'm going to talk about scope in a little while, so we can drill into this in a minute, but not really knowing what we want, that's a thing. I think a lot of times is getting really clear on, what exactly we need to do in terms of, is it a rebrand? Is it a refresh? Is it just messaging? Like those are all different things. And so I think one of the big challenges to me about this whole topic is it's very, first of all, marketers over the years have been very loose with the terminology they use. So there's not like one single defined terminology. So you got to be really careful you're all agreeing on what it is exactly you're talking about. And so that's a challenge. And then number two, just inherently, unless it's a marketing driven organization, which is extraordinarily rare in healthcare, like there's a real skepticism toward the topic at all. Like, I can hire a graphic art designer for, to get some new colors, or I don't want to change my brand. It's fine the way it is, or whatever. And I think that understanding the value is a real challenge at lots of levels, at the executive level, at the team level. I don't know if you have any comments on that, because I've seen that over and over again. Even people that come to us asking for a brand are skeptical of the value of a brand. So just the way things are sometimes.
Yeah, I understand it. And I think it's, especially if an organization has a more complex marketing org, uh, where they have, the different segments and silos of work, and they all coordinate on a marketing calendar that they execute against. Unless you're a Fortune, 50 company, you don't necessarily have a person on staff that's focused on brand, that's focused on brand evolution, like you said. So when you're thinking about a more modest company like us that has, a smaller but still refined marketing team, I think there's an inclination to think I can do that, and you might, but it's the idea is, can you do it well? And if I do that, what's, again, going back to the term, the opportunity cost of the people that I have on my team not working on the projects they would normally work on, because a brand execution, a brand strategy and execution, it takes a lot of time and effort, and that's why you work with an agency, because you have both the expertise and you're paying for the bandwidth of that expertise, because or should acknowledge that while you might be able to try to do it internally, it's just not going to turn out the same, and you'll distract yourself from your core mission, and ultimately that opportunity cost will be far more than engaging with an agency.
That's great. And I would just add a couple things for those of you that are struggling that want to get this done, because as I joke, and I got this from somebody else years ago, but marketing departments often feel like they're kicked to the kids' table. They don't really, they're not sitting with the CFO and the COO, and that can be challenging. But if you're feeling like you need this, Ben just provided some great insight there. I think one of the biggest things was the opportunity cost of not doing it, I think is really important. And another thing is, like the internal skills, and yeah, everybody can be creative. But if this is important to you, I mean, this is really truly a team sport with specialized skill. Like, I can't do what our art directors do. Like the team we put together for Ben and your team, was truly, and you've got acted, touched, I don't know how many people in our team, but the artists, the writers, the account managers, me on the strategy level. And it really was a team effort. Like everybody on our team had and you guys had a touch of that ultimate
Mhm.
end product. And I think that's really important. These are all different skill sets, and it all comes magical when you have the right sort of team, which goes to my next question. Um, I'm going to say this, dude, this is a scary thing, right? Like, it's got to be really scary to hire an agency. You're going to say, okay, not only are we going to spend all this money, but I'm going to put our company's reputation on the line, Mr. CEO or whomever. And if it doesn't turn out well, it's not going to look good for me personally. So there's a lot of money in it. It's a lot of time. And so it's a scary thing. Any advice for that? Because I get that when I talk. I'll just fun fact, Ben. We have an RFP that a major health system in the US reached out to us. It was due for us. We had to get our side done, I think, in September 30th or something. And they sent us the first email saying, okay, it's going to be the end of the year. And they just sent me another email saying, okay, it's going to be February 28th. And I get it, but the thing is, for them, it's even bigger. They're asking to pick an agency of record based on a 50-minute meeting with us plus Q&A. Like that's just like that's such a scary thing. I would be nervous. But in a smaller way, let's talk about the branding, in terms of how do you mitigate that? How do you feel like, confident and sleep well as you go through this process? What are some of the things you look for?
Well,
I guess
I
that's the
think,
main question is how do you, obviously it's going to be scary, but how do you look for the right agency? How do you make that decision? What's important?
well, I think a lot of it for us was the the way your team demonstrated that it wasn't just a superficial engagement for them from the start. Because yes, you're a healthcare agency and you had some experience in working with oncology at the practice level. There's an admirable project you did for Astera that really caught our eye, but it was the idea that you were going to work with, an oncology company, and it was clear from the start in working with Paul and the early members of the team that the research had been done, and not just at a cursory level, that there was a deep understanding of where our company was, where our competition was, how they were articulating their brand into the market, and the gap that we had, and the confidence, I think, to speak to their knowledge of that gap and the things that we needed to incorporate to a successful project plan. That was apparent from the very beginning. And it wasn't just that they took the time to understand that, but they also internalized it. So it wasn't just like superficial knowledge by recitation. They really ingested it, digested it, and came back to us with a product from the very beginning of here's where you are, here's where we think you need to be in order to be competitive and identifiable and differentiated. And I think that meant the most to us and helped us select you as an agency from the very beginning, because it just demonstrated a commitment to the project that was above and beyond the scope of just here's how much time, how many hours, and how many dollars. We could see from the beginning there was an investment by your team in in a certain measure of pride in what that finished product could be before we even started the engagement, and that was exciting to us. And ultimately, that influenced me to firmly advocate to work with your team.
That's awesome. By the way, we haven't talked about this before. That's really helpful to me as the CEO. I would say that it's funny, Ben, you'll appreciate this, I bet. Yeah, as an agency owner, most agencies today, because it is a tough business, it's just like a lot of things out of your control. There's always financial pressures. There's always lots going on and a million different moving parts every day. But the consultant side of us, the strategist in us, we just can't overrule that because a lot of agencies, it's about scale. How can we do this quickly and
Mhm.
efficiently and make as much profit as possible? I just can't do that. I have to really understand what it is I'm working with and give the best advice. Like I just got off the phone this morning with a really cool business app in the behavioral health space, but it's a really complicated thing. And I went back through all the notes from my team. I went back all the recordings, like, guys, I still don't understand this well enough to help. So we spent an hour really immediately going into every detail. And then when your agency drills down that deep, then they come back and well, obviously we're starting with healthcare expertise, right? But when you drill down that deep, then we can pull back with fantastic ideas. You just have to get in the weeds. You have to be able to understand that. So that feedback is awesome. I really appreciate that. And I wasn't even aware of that. And I know there's always fits and starts. Listeners will probably relate to this too. Ben and his team came out, reached out, then they sort of didn't quite disappear, but we didn't hear much for a while. Then they were able to pop back out. And so we get it. There's always internal things you have to work through, but at some point you have to commit. And so committing, it requires the right statement of work. And I love that you suggested this is a topic today. Man, this is so much fun for me because these are all little things that we talk about internally, but I don't get a chance to talk to clients about it very often until it's all over. So this is fun. So very wisely, let's talk about the agency point of view first. From our standpoint, getting the right scope of work is vital because we all know what we're talking about. But I think I'd be much more interested in from your standpoint, because that's a sophisticated thing to even talk about, right? So help me get with some ideas about statement of work and why that's so vital and how you guys got it right with our team or just in general.
Well, I think there are a couple of things to talk about here. And one is, what does a statement of work really accomplish for the project, right? It gives us a framework for how we're going to work together, our obligations to one another. There's points of accountability and measures of what that means for each entity. For us, for example, we knew that if we got to a certain waypoint and wanted changes after that, it would represent scope creep, and there would be, a financial consideration. So that in and of itself encouraged us to kind of stay within the guardrails and make sure the project was moving towards that date that we talked about. Because there's always the temptation as you go through a project plan to kind of deviate or take a little roundabout detour. And that can be productive, but unless it's managed properly, you can end up out in the woods and you're not anywhere near your goal. And all of a sudden your timeline's been eaten away by this diversion. So I think that in and of itself can be very helpful. But for us, it was more important to participate in developing the scope of work and have that internal dialogue that forced us to have that conversation to say, what does good look like and how do we get there? And, to a certain extent, what were we willing to spend to get to that destination? And then once we went to that destination, what was next? Both for us and for our continued engagement with your organization. So in order to lay that path, it's kind of like back in the day, as people of our age, Stuart, not to age you to mine, if you wanted to go on a road trip, you went to AAA and you got a triptych, which was just
Yeah.
like a big book of flippable maps.
Yeah.
And yeah, you could try to do it without it, but if you didn't, you'd get lost and end up in Albuquerque like they do in the Bugs Bunny cartoons.
Yeah.
Um, we didn't do that because we developed a really good project plan, scope of work with your team, and we adhered to it. And if we deviated from it, we agreed on the nature of that deviation and the ultimate accountability for each party. And I think at the end of the day, we had a great project that fell within budget, that appropriately respected the time and material that you guys put into it. And we are all very happy with the outcome.
That's awesome. And as you keep talking about this, remember why you're such a dream client for us. Because that's what, we take our responsibilities seriously. And you guys did too. And I think that's really important for a partnership, right? It's a partnership. It's not a one-way street. And we want to give everything. But I think too, like on your side, you guys are very thoughtful in your approach. And I'd like to say you mentioned Paul earlier, and other members of our teams are also very thoughtful. And I think that, really lent for a good marriage in that case. And by the way, we're extremely, we've done, as I mentioned, I can't remember offline or online earlier. The This one is just a project just came together so perfectly. Like first of all, we love getting naming is hard, hard, hard. But you don't get the opportunity to name it very often, right? It's like it's at best at maybe every other year we get to do the full rebrand, including the name, right? We do branding
Mhm.
all the time, but a lot of times the name is already set. So to do the name is hard, and then with the positioning and the brand messaging and the brand structure, and how does that work with the brand architecture with CureMD, and how does all that stuff work? It's just a lot there. So it was a meaty opportunity. It was budgeted right. We had enough budget to do it right, and no excess, mind you, when we go through changes or anything. But we did to be able to do it right. And then, at the end of the day, we're just very proud of the results. So I'd like to get before we wrap up just a couple other things.
Mhm.
The once it was greenlit, any kind of advice about like what happened along the way, history, processes, or just what that felt like to you guys, or I'm not sure if there's anything there for you to respond to or not. But we did have a very important launch of a new brand, so on your side you had to prepare too. So any comments on that part?
Well, I'll speak to one thing that I think it'll be important, hopefully, for other clients you might have down the line, and that is, making sure you have robust and accountable internal dialogue around key decision points. So, for example, speaking of naming, we had a whole deck on names that we went through with the team. Some were favored, some not. Then we went away and came back and said, no, it's this name. And then we had another dialogue and came back and said, no, it's this name. So, you know, like we said, whenever you're not as well aligned internally on decisions like that, I mean, you guys were really patient with us, but every time you say, well, we'll meet next week to talk about that and give you more feedback on our internal dialogue, it's a week that we don't have towards that target date. So I'd encourage other clients as they go through this to, you know, be focused on when those waypoints are going to happen. Make sure your resources are in place to have that conversation, that you have kind of an internal accountability matrix so that once the decision is made, there's a stick to itiveness around it. Because especially if you're doing a full rebrand and picking a new name, there's a lot of decisions. You're going to pick the name, the font, the color, the size. We had a consideration that we're a subsidiary of CureMD, so it was Oncentric, a CureMD company. Where are you going to put a CureMD company in the logo? A ton of decisions. So just make sure you're ready for that stage and other stages like it. So the project can keep pace and you're not getting wrapped around the axle on, well, I like this color slightly better than this one, and you can't gain internal consensus because until you do, the design team can't move forward with the next version of what you need to see. So it's that kind of it sounds mundane, but it's really essential as you execute on a brand strategy like this that your internal ducks are in a row to get through those kind of heavy, intense decision-making periods.
So again, so much here, Ben, to unpack. Number one, there's two things timeline to consider. Number one is I see this a lot, and it didn't happen with you as much, but we certainly didn't have any extra time. Is like the getting stuff approved can often be like, hurry up and then wait, and then wait,
Hmm.
and then wait. And then from an agency standpoint, it's a little like uncomfortable because we don't appear needy and beggy. Like, you guys please make a decision, right? Because it's not where we're coming from. But if you truly want to do this, we're running out of time while the internal decisions are happening, right? The clock, and oftentimes there's a deadline, there's a big event, something we're trying to do. So that's not going to change. So that's a challenge. Just like I would say, if you're thinking about this, try to build in plenty of time way before you think you need to do the launch. So you've got time for the inevitable internal hiccups that happen that may delay this launch, weeks or months. And again, the deadline usually never changes, so it's helpful. In your guys' case, we still had time to do it right, but there's times where it's like, wait, we can't do this anymore. We just don't have enough time. And then the second thing is, you're right. Once you're in it, each stage it's sequential largely. Sometimes we can build the branding. At some point, we can do this on a parallel path with this, but usually it's pretty sequential. So it's like if we're hung up, we're hung up, and so that's really important. And as an agency, we don't want to be a nag. We don't want to be like, I joke, it's like I stole this term from somebody else, to be a Sheltie dog, like biting with the heels to get them in line. But kind of have to sometimes, right? So from the agency perspective, you love these people, you want to keep the relationship. On the other hand, if you don't, nip a little bit, we're going to end up missing the boat, and they're going to be really unhappy with you. So it's a delicate balance. But you guys did a great job. I thought you guys were awesome with that. But these are very real things, Ben. The stuff we're talking about right now are like all the time, happen all the time.
Yeah,
So
the runway is always shorter than you think it is, and
yeah.
always try to build in bonus time. So, for example, last minute we asked your team to do a booth design for us, which they executed very quickly and very well, and we had a booth built right before the show using the graphics and design that your team delivered. But had we not built in a little bonus time, that wouldn't have happened. So give yourself some grace, give the team some extra wiggle room, and you'll always be happier with the outcome.
That's great. And then, so actually, I'd love to know more about the big debut. So, we remember we came from starting this call, we talked about, a sea of sameness and sort of lost in the fray. Then you guys have had a big debut, and that was not quite a year ago, right? So, I'd love to hear about the debut and what's happened since then.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to not only launch at COA because it's the largest collection of community oncology practices during the course of the year. But we created buzz because we had great booth positioning. The booth, like I said, was vibrant. The colors that we worked on together really caught the eye. So there's a lot of dynamism in the logo that we worked with you to design, and I think it brought people into the booth. What are you? What do you do? How do you do it? So we actually had, you know, probably 5 times the boost traffic we had the previous year because people were curious. They wanted to know. We were a new face in a room full of familiar faces, and that in and of itself felt like a big splash. And since we've launched the website, we've utilized the platform in different other conferences where we create that same kind of buzz because people see that we're a fresh face and we bring something different to the table, and we've been able to leverage this to have far more conversations than we're used to, and it's great to be busy.
That's awesome. So, by the way, my art team would be overjoyed to hear that. And just to give a little insight to this project, and we'll keep a link to I think we have a portfolio page about this on our website. And Ben, with you're okay, I'll probably translate this into a case study as well for us. But uh, the whole idea, one of the key ideas that we talked to the CureMD slash Oncentric team from the beginning was that we wanted to make sure we had a visual system, colors, graphics, name, everything that stood out because really just go to HIMSS or go to any medical conference
Yes.
and everybody looks alike and everybody says almost the same thing. And so we really focused on picking colors that were vibrant, out there. It's a challenge because you want it to be modern but and timeless at the same time. But I really feel like we were able to thread that needle, and I love hearing that feedback on the booth because I'd have been thrilled if you guys had a 10 or 40 by 40 booth, but even with 10 by 10, we're able to do stand out in a crowd, which is awesome. Any last words of advice for our audience as we wrap up here?
You know, uh, I think the biggest piece of advice is there comes a point where you need to jump off the diving board. You can stand there and contemplate the water all you want, but you know that eventually it's really hot out there. You got to get wet. So find the right dive to do as you launch yourself into the water, but make the jump because I think had we done this a couple of years earlier, we would have been a lot further down the road with our growth strategy and executing against working our way into different segments of the oncology space. Just because, like I said, there were opportunities that we were made aware of that we missed out on because people just didn't know who we are. So I won't say that I haven't lost some sleep contemplating that, to use the word again, opportunity cost, but I have because I just feel like had we done this sooner, uh, we would be much farther down the road of our grand strategy than we are today. But hey, we did it. I'm thrilled with the outcome. And regrets can't have them because all we have is the reality we've created together, and we're thrilled with the project and the outcome. And we thank you and your team.
Thank you for being awesome clients. It was a fantastic partnership. Look forward to working with you and you guys and the larger company, hopefully in other ways for years to come. We really appreciate the work we did with you guys. It was fun. Never easy, but
Never
fun.
easy, but fun.
It's just a lot, but you guys actually made it fun. It was easy too sometimes because it's very easy to work with clients you like. So that was great. Thank you, Ben.
It's a pleasure. Look forward to seeing you again soon.
All right, great. Okay, great job. Seriously, that was really fun. I totally
Awesome.
enjoyed that. And it was really fun to hear you because we don't get that feedback enough, right? Like you're just racing the day. Happy clients are happy. Unhappy clients let you know. So
Yeah,
it's
don't they?
really, so it's a nice breath of fresh air. My team will be overjoyed to hear this. So good job. We'll publish this. I don't have a date yet. I'll let you know by email. I don't know if
Sure,
you sent me a photo yet. I don't think I have one for you. So if you could send me the professional photo, we
sure.
will give you the tentative date to release it. Usually, it's been somewhere between a month and 2 months out. It's so we'll get this out as soon as I can. This will be a really good one. I'm really looking forward to seeing this published. So, great job, awesome.
Thanks. I really enjoyed it. It's always fun chatting with you, and think we covered a lot of good ground today.
You is really good. Like I have to figure out how to leverage this because it's like a how-to guide for clients on branding. Like really, like we've got one right now that is not doing what you guys did, and I wish I would have had this before. It's hard to insert it now in the middle of the process, right? But I wish I had this before because now when I have clients that or new clients are thinking about this, I can send them this and like, here's the way to do it. Ben and his team did it right. And so you
We
guys,
appreciate that.
we a team sport. We throw the ball to you, you throw it back to us. Like that's when it works. So good job on working with us, and thanks again for the time today. We'll
No
talk
worries. We'll talk again soon.
very soon. So
Alrighty.
thanks. Bye.
Bye.